University Career Center. Want to thank our wonderful panelists for joining us today. For all you students who are watching this live, thank you for joining us. We're super excited to have you. Feel free to comment in the comments with any questions that you have. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to go in the order of my screen. Roxy, will you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, so my name's Roxy Berger. I work at PRA Health Sciences, which is a clinical research organization, and I am a flow cytometry lab analyst too. So a little bit about a clinical research organization. We basically are helping take drugs from development, and we step in at PRA right at that preclinical trial all the way through clinical trials phase 1, 2, and 3, up to getting the drug FDA approved. So we receive samples at our location, and we run a variety of tests on them. So we're on bench doing the work, and then we do all of the analysis in-house and send the data back to our clients.
Awesome. Gentry, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Gentry Fowler. I work at KCAS Bioscience and Biomarker Analytical. My company is actually kind of similar to Roxy's. We're a contract research organization, so we also do preclinical trials as well. We don't take the samples in-house. Usually our clients will have their samples shipped to us from their different clinical sites, and then we will process those. I am an analyst too in the biopharmaceutical ligand binding group. So I run ELISAs to process what are called our large molecules. Helping get drugs to market.
Great. Samantha, you're next.
Okay, so my name is Samantha Harton, and I am a research scientist at the Children's Mercy Research Institute in Kansas City. And the work I do focuses on rare diseases in children and a pediatric population. And specifically, I work on distinguishing specific genetic variants that cause the diseases, and then deciphering the functional consequences of those variants. So the lab I work in integrates variant identification and functional profiling on a massively parallel scale to accelerate the process of translating a clinical detection of a genetic variant into meaningful and actionable biological discoveries.
Awesome. Laura.
So I work for Evergy, which is the electric utility that services halfway through Missouri to halfway through Kansas. And I'm an environmental consultant, and I primarily work on all of our Clean Water Act programs. So there's several different laws within the Clean Water Act, and I work on all of those for the company.
Wonderful. And finally, Justine.
So I work at WuXi Oncology right now. So I'm a clinical research organization as well. And I work in project management and site management. So right now I'm working mostly in startup, and all of our studies are phase 1. And then recently I've been working on some that are first in human, first in class. So yeah, some really exciting stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Super excited to have you. This is for anyone, I'm sure you can remember, when you were in school, you're trying to figure out what you're wanting to do, what's exciting, what's not. So I'd love to hear, and I'm sure our students would as well, what drew you to your specific fields?
So I actually, when I graduated back in 2016, I immediately went into an academic research position because that's kind of what you find out more about in terms of the research world when you're in college. It's like, oh, if you're in sciences, it's like pre-med, or you can go do research and become a teacher eventually and run your own lab. And so I kind of thought that was my only other path since I didn't want to go to med school. And I worked in academic research for 2 years. And I just didn't find that it had a great, it wasn't as close of a connection in the lab that I was in to helping people. So I was working in a yeast laboratory. We were doing some really cool science, but it didn't really feel like I was helping people with the work that I was doing day to day. And so switching to an industry job where you're dealing with actual patient samples really had that connection that I liked. And I wish I would have learned more about industry, when I was in my undergrad program, because there's so many industry positions, and specifically in Kansas City, we have a huge wealth of industry positions.
Yeah, similar to Roxy. So I actually started after I graduated in 2015 working as kind of like a laboratory manager for a university. So I prepped undergraduate labs for a variety of courses, micro, genetics, cell, physiology, both plant and animal. And it was really fun, and I loved all the variety of my day-to-day. And so, but I knew that I wanted to move to Kansas City. And so one of the first jobs when I was in Kansas City was actually leaving my biology roots and going to an HPLC laboratory working on medical devices. But that got me exposed to industry, specifically manufacturing, so GMP, so good manufacturing practices. And through that I was able to get an experience for the regulatory side, and I found that I really liked reviewing the data and kind of taking that more observatory look at it, and actually got really into reading FDA warning letters. They're kind of a fun read if you need something to do in quarantine and want to something branch out. But no, so then I actually from that position joined KCAS, but as a quality assurance specialist. And so that was a completely removed from the bench position, which was really neat in that I got to look at the studies from a completely outside perspective and be able to see, do these studies, are our data doing what they actually are saying that we're doing? And, being able to say, yes, this is a good drug, it should proceed, or no, this one needs to go back to the drawing board. But after doing that for a while, I definitely did feel my fingers itch to go back to my pipettes. And so now I'm back in the lab, which actually is a really cool part about my company, is that they have a lot of different opportunities to move around within it. So if you want to try on different hats, it's a really unique place to be able to see science from all of its different aspects.
I'll add to that. I think also when you get into the sciences, like Roxy mentioned, it's pre-med or you're in a lab. Those are your options. And so I was also initially pre-med when I came into school, and then realized once I didn't want to do that, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew I loved science. So I'm drawn to environmental science because the field is so broad. You can be in a lab, you can do those kind of more technical side of it, but it's everything from agriculture to climate change science to environmental justice, conservation. You have land use and planning. And so I think because it's so broad, I was really drawn to that, because if I ever want to have a career change, I have tons of options. And then you can specialize within that, right? There's water, there's soil, there's air. Those are all very specialized fields. And so I think that's a huge benefit, and something I love about the field is that it's always changing. And then there's also industry, and then you have your regulatory agencies, and those are very different positions as well. So I think that's one thing I really love about the industry.
Awesome. Well, Roxy, you and Laura both talked about this a little bit, about how, when you got started, it was either pre-med or research. And I'm curious, for all of you, have there been other misconceptions that you maybe had about this sort of world that you live in? Or maybe when, you tell someone what you do, they immediately assume something that is couldn't be further from the truth. What's something that you find that most people assume about your sort of work that's actually not quite the story?
I feel like, especially with clinical research, or especially if you say, the word pharmaceuticals, the company as well, there are ads, of course, for inpatient healthy volunteers, stuff like that. I think immediately when I tell people what I do, even my family, they think, you're either a physician dosing or a nurse dosing patients every day, or that you are a subject. And, the term guinea pig and all of that, I work mostly in previously I'd worked mostly in phase 2. So those are patients that already have a certain disease. And so you're really just helping them further with something that's not available yet. And so it's not really the same kind of thing that they're thinking. But yeah, I mean, pre-med, it doesn't, just the name, it doesn't sound very much like you have a lot of options. I didn't even know initially when I kind of signed up for the course or for the route that there was things like, PA school, or you could be like an occupational therapist, things like that. I had no idea. So I think that was part of it that was really confusing for me. But yeah, found a good niche.
Maybe it's just because I come from a small town area and we don't really have big industry positions there, or facilities for biology, or at least ones that you would think of. And so I guess I kind of always imagine industry work for science to kind of be like a factory line. And I guess maybe that's just because my dad also worked on a factory line as my youth, and I never saw that, but I just managed kind of imagine the old Model T, but maybe with PCR tubes, and just kind of being a monotonous, screw the cap on, you do that for 8 hours. But it is not even though I do ELISAs day in and day out, each one of them has, for better or worse, their own personality. And so depending on what assay that I'm running that day, or even, even with inventorying sample tubes, because every site will do them differently. And so just trying to get them into our management system, I can think that I'm going to know what's going to happen that day, and then something will go exciting in the lab. And so, no, it's not a cookie cutter, come in, punch out. It's definitely got a lot more creativity that you kind of, I think, associate more with academia. But we write it down always, and in very great detail, even what water you used and how much. Because if you don't write it down, it didn't happen.
Yeah, kind of going off of what Gentry was saying, coming from academia, I kind of had this, misconceived perception of what my job would be working in an industry position. And it's important to note that even though lab analyst ones are considered mainly on bench at our company, they still are not doing the same thing. They're not on bench, 100% of their days. Flow cytometry, we do a lot of the analysis by hand. So it's a lot of pattern recognition. It's all like a big puzzle. And so even our entry-level analysts, they're analyzing their own data. And so it's a really high-level critical thinking position, even in our entry level.
And I think just to add, we've kind of touched on this before, but the idea of when you go into science, you're either, like you said, pre-med or research or in academia, and that industry positions can be either computer-based or bench-based. Before this position, was a technical support specialist with a biotech company in Colorado. So basically, I helped people troubleshoot their experiments, and you have to have a certain level of technical knowledge and problem solving skills to be able to do that type of position. So I think things like that people don't automatically associate with a scientific degree as well. The other thing I find is people assume that I'm a scientist, so I know everything about science in every field. And my work in graduate school was very specialized. So I have a very specialized knowledge in areas of science, and it's not always all encompassing as some people might think. And so I think it can be overwhelming a lot of time for students. The breadth of knowledge that you're expected to learn as an undergrad is not necessarily the same type of information that you're going to learn in graduate school or other courses and then use in your position on an everyday basis.
I think that's a really good point, and I find that actually happens to me quite frequently in my current position because we interface a lot with all the different power plants. And so someone will call me from a power plant, ask me a question about waste or about a landfill, and I have no idea. And so a lot of it is specialized, and my entire career has been in water. That has been my specialization, and so it is interesting even within the bucket of environmental science, like that's a smaller bucket. I don't know as much about soil or waste or other things like that.
That's
I also
awesome.
I also find that with environmental science, there's a couple misconceptions. One is that people think that we're all kind of like hippies or like tree huggers, which sounds silly, but you'd be surprised the questions. And then I think another is just that I think industry gets a really bad connotation in environmental science. And I find especially like in my field working for Evergy and electric utility, right? Like carbon and like carbon footprints get like a lot of conversation in the media. And it's really difficult, like not being in the industry, to look at that and understand all the levels and everything that goes into that. And so I actually was working for a state agency, and I did kind of my rounds in the state agencies for environmental positions, but I have a totally different perspective now working in industry than I was when I was working in the regulatory agencies. So I was kind of in college and in my master's almost afraid to work in industry because of that bad connotation. But quite honestly, like I love this position so much more than what I was doing with the agencies.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. That was great. I'm curious. So, y'all have a great wealth of experience between the group of you, and we've touched a little bit on how, what sort of class knowledge you would need, and the specialization that you can take into your particular fields. But I'm curious about some of maybe the skills that you have found either in yourself or in your leaders or your colleagues. People that like, oh, they have this and that's why they're really successful, or something that they don't have, and that's what makes them maybe a troubling coworker or something like that.
I think being able to troubleshoot and to critically think out a problem. So if you have something that you're not expecting, being able to recognize that it wasn't the outcome that you were expecting, and to be able to stop and ask a question versus either trying to just barrel through it and then make a bigger potential problem, or just keeping quiet and just being like, well, let's just see how it goes. Because definitely being able to tell other people and communicate that and just have that strong communication. But then also if you potentially have the experience, or to be able to think, well, maybe we could try this, and being able to bring that to the table. Because even though I'm an analyst, like my boss still, like when my assays fail, she's like, okay, so let's go back to the drawing board. Like what do we have of variables? Like what could have been different this time whenever it had been passing before? And so being able to have that kind of input and willingness to, discuss and work things out, I think is really, really great.
Yeah, and just to add to that, being a good teammate, a lot of times you really need to be able to work as a team with other people in a lab situation. I've had both good and bad experiences, and I will say the good outweighs the bad, but yes, you have to be able to be a good teammate, and that also links to having good communication skills, kind of what Gentry touched on.
Yeah.
And being able to ask questions and ask the right questions, but also feel comfortable saying, I don't know,
Yes.
or I need help finding out. Is really important, as well as being an independent scientist. I think that's also very helpful.
I always try to, whenever I'm training or back when I had student workers, if I ask them, do you know what you're doing? And I find that oftentimes people will tell you yes, because they don't want to tell you that they don't know, and they'll just try to wing it. But the better question, so if someone asks you that question, the question that they really are trying to answer is, do you feel comfortable and confident with what you're doing? Answer that question.
I feel like for me, I'm like really opposite as far as I have a really standard desk job. I deal with a lot of really high, I've been able to deal with a lot of high level, high functioning people, and they're, they're very consistent as far as their qualities that are helpful to the entire team, as high level as somebody might be or might get. They follow through. They're super detail oriented. Even when they have an overarching view, they're more looking at the big picture, but they're still detail oriented, and they're really organized.
So I think, especially if you're going into a CRO, within a research organization, you have positions that are like method development or quality assurance based, and then you have your operations team, which is running, the samples that you receive every day. If you're on the operations team, you need to be flexible. That is such a huge thing, because especially with flow cytometry, we have limited stability on our samples. So sometimes the samples arrive, they get delivered, and we have to process them within 2 hours. And so even if the schedule said you were doing something else, if we have samples arrive unexpectedly, you need to drop everything, and that's what you're doing that day. And you just need to be willing to kind of like roll with that.
Yeah, I think all those are really great, and I think all of them resonate a lot with me. I think communication is huge in my position specifically. We're kind of the corporate barrier between what's going on at the power plants and at different facilities that we own and any regulatory agency. And so I could get a call from someone at a power plant, and then turn around 5 minutes later, have to go call someone at the state agency to have a conversation about it. So that's definitely two very different people with very different experiences. And being able to kind of explain the regulations and the minute details to someone who doesn't understand, but also maybe is frustrated about having to comply with something like that. I also think being flexible is huge, because, I could have plans to work on something all day or all week, and then all of a sudden I get a call that there's a big oil spill somewhere, and I have to get in my car and go and call hazmat. So being flexible is huge. And I think that really is applicable in most scientific fields.
Awesome. I'm curious, because y'all have been in the industry for a little while. How, from your perspective, has your work or your field or maybe your focus changed over time? How is the industry evolving as you've been in it?
Something that's interesting working for like in our field with the pharmaceuticals is that the FDA is constantly updating their views on things, be it with white papers that they publish. So like anti-drug antibody assays are something that we do, and they're really cool, and it's kind of a more upcoming thing. So they published a white paper, I think it's 2018 or 2019, governance documenting or how to go about and how to best practices for it. And so they'll do that kind of periodically. So you wouldn't think that, the pharmaceutical changes too much. I mean, it's still going to change a lot because it's science, but it's really interesting to see that ebb and flow and how the FDA reacts to different things, especially like going back to the warning letters again. But whenever they first had, with the COVID outbreak and everything, they had like a whole slew of warning letters go out to different companies that were companies. They were like websites that were selling, kind of sketchy looking websites. They're like, hey, shut this down. You haven't gone through us. Do not sell this. You cannot advertise like this. So it's really interesting to see how quickly the FDA can respond to things like that.
I would say for our industry, we have to adapt to changing regulations. It's definitely not super quick typically, but we are really subject to kind of the political climate at the time. And so, we're looking down the line for regulations that can come into effect in the next year that are going to affect our plants. And those can, cost millions of dollars projects that we have to put in to adapt to different kinds of regulations. I would also say, just when you think about the utility industry in general, we're having to adapt to, what climate science is telling us. And so Evergy, for example, we put out, we're going to have an 80% carbon reduction by 2050, which that's huge. And so we're adding wind, we're adding solar, but my job in 30 years could look entirely differently, because a lot of the water that I'm working on now is from our coal-fired power plants. So I don't think it's as quick necessarily, because environmental regulation takes a long time to pass, but it's definitely happening in our industry.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I'm curious what, students are always wanting to know how to stand out, and as they're preparing to enter your different fields, what is some advice that you would maybe give to students, whether, they're looking for jobs right now, or, maybe they're an underclassman and getting ready to in a couple years? What's something that you would want to arm them with to help them as they're pursuing this?
I would say, don't be afraid to apply for something, even if you don't have direct experience. So speaking from experience, like flow cytometry, I had never done a flow cytometry assay before prior to working at PRA. And that's true for almost everyone on our team. Flow cytometry is just something that you don't get a lot of experience in most colleges. And our boss, he really likes that. It means that they're going to train everyone to do it correctly here. And you're not going to come in with preconceived notions of like how things should be done. But I had to be encouraged to apply for this position, because I looked at it and I was like, I'm not competitive. I don't know what I'm doing with flow cytometry. And so just hearing that, like knowing, hey, it's okay if you don't have that direct connection, you can still be a great candidate.
Yeah, going with that, I think also just showing that you're enthusiastic to learn is a big one. Like we do a lot of just fresh out of school grad or like hires, and the ones that stand out, especially to me, if they don't have the direct skills, is that like how excited are you to try it? If you're going to take it and give it all you've got, I'm really excited to like have you come to my team and try that, versus someone that's like, I don't have experience. I'm meh about learning it. Like, no, if you want to stand out, like show them that you're excited and that you're, what you lack in direct experience, you're more than willing to make up for, and just like your commitment to learn it.
I think for me, it's easy to say, having been in the industry and having had several different jobs and stuff. But I think in the beginning, it's easy to note some larger companies, larger corporations, and just say, I'll take anything I can do. I'll get in at the very entry level. I'll do whatever you want me to do as long as I can work for you. And that's absolutely great. There are occasions where that works and you can work your way up. But I think, at least for me, it was more important to find something that was interesting, something that I was going to enjoy, maybe a smaller organization that would value you more. You get to do a lot more. You get a lot more hands-on training, a lot more responsibility, which, I learned probably more in my first year at a small company than I would ever have learned in 2 or 3 years at a larger corporation, because I'm physically doing all of the work myself, and you build yourself up. You feel a lot of confidence. You have a lot of support because you have a smaller team, stuff like that. People are more willing to jump in and help, stuff like that. I think that's super important.
Yeah, and I will add, if you have an idea of already kind of the work you want to go into, trying to get maybe some internship or shadowing experience, or into working with or in a lab as an undergraduate, I think can be important as well, because then you get to know if you actually want to do that work, instead of maybe figuring that out down the line that this wasn't for you and you'd like to change kind of what you're doing. So I do think it is important to get maybe some early on experience if you can in the field that you're interested in.
And I know whenever I started looking for jobs in Kansas City, I was typing in, scientist into, monster.com. And fun fact, that probably won't get you necessarily exactly the positions that you're qualified for right out of the gate, even though in your heart of hearts you do feel that you're a scientist. But I actually worked with a hiring agency, like a recruitment agency. And that's especially a good way if you're just now getting into, or just starting to get into the industry and you don't know necessarily all the best search terms or keywords and things like that. They're really good to help you. And they also, if you wanted more of a flexibility, sometimes larger companies will hire as per contract basis versus a full on. So if you kind of wanted to dip your toes in the water of different places, it's a nice starting point if you don't know exactly what, and have someone kind of help you out.
I cannot agree more with contracts. Contracts sounded so scary when I was first out of college that I was like, you're not promised a job. They could fire me next week. It's absolutely not like that. They're hiring you. They're investing in you. It's not a for sure next year job, but it's a for sure, for 6 months job. You have a contract term, and I've worked 2 now contract to hire positions, and they've been awesome. And so you don't get fantastic benefits, but you get paid more, and it is what it is. It's good for both sides, I think, really.
And it definitely helped me find, if it wasn't for my contract to hire job, I wouldn't have, in chemistry, where I was like, I don't really feel like I'm a chemist per se, but I can at least try it. Just don't be afraid to try things, because then it might help kind of get you into what you'll find that you really enjoy.
Yeah, I think internships are the number one thing I tell students that they need to go after, because I really think, because the environmental field is so broad, it gives you a much better idea of what you do want to do or what you definitely don't want to do. And I think it gives you a good understanding of how some of the regulatory agencies work and how industry works. Because you can sit and read all you want about what's going on, but it's really different when you're in the position and you're working with people on a project. I also would say just make sure you're talking to people about what they're doing. I find that a lot of times when people ask me questions about my job, after I say a few sentences, they kind of glaze over a little. And so I think and I'm sure you guys have that experience as well. People oftentimes don't know what we do because it's really specialized. And so I think if you can get out and ask people what they do and what they like and like about their jobs, you'll have a much better idea about what you're actually interested in.
Well, Laura, you're jumping ahead of me because I was going to ask this a little later, but now since you made the perfect segue, I'm curious, what is y'all's favorite thing about your job? We talked a little about what drew you to this field, but I'm talking about, your typical day, or sounds like a lot of you don't have a typical day. What's just one of your favorite types of projects or things that you get to do?
I honestly really like working with my sites. Being a 100% virtual position, sometimes you go an entire day just buried in spreadsheets. And so it's really great when I have sites that are working with me that are excited about the investigational product, and they want to know more. Just building that relationship is my favorite part. It adds the human aspect, even though I'm not seeing patients, they are. So yeah, drawing those lines is really great for me.
I love analyzing data. Like I said before, flow cytometry data, it's a lot of pattern recognition. I love doing puzzles, and that really has helped me be good at my job. And so we actually, some of our interview questions when we're interviewing new hires is asking, do you like puzzles? Are you artistic? Talents like that really help you out when you're analyzing the data.
Yeah, similar to analyzing the data, but also I really enjoy kind of making it ready for not just our quality assurance department, but also the FDA. So making sure that we have strong, defendable data. And because I spent time as a quality assurance specialist, I like it that my peers come to me and like, okay, here's our finding. How do we, best address it without, it's really easy to think, oh, I know an easy correction for this. And then you do it and you're like, oh no, I just made more questions than I answered. So I find it's a really interesting kind of like logic puzzle to be like, have I, sufficiently defended that I did, X or did Y? And does this make sense if someone were to like pick this up again in 5 years?
Yeah, I'll have to say the favorite part of my day, which is not typical, like you mentioned, is just doing the hands-on work. I do mostly wet bench work, so, pipetting, running gels, doing cell culture work. And the best part of that is at the end of a project, seeing kind of the fruits of your labor, seeing the data, being able to analyze it then. I think that really is something that I like about my position is it takes a lot of work to do a massively parallel genetic screen, but at the end of that, it's really exciting to kind of see what variants we can link directly to a patient's genetic data and the functional consequences of that. I think is really exciting to work with.
I think my favorite part is that every day is different, that I get to work with lots of different kinds of people. And I think what we do, like our environmental compliance department, we really offer a service to the power plants. And so we do get to do some of that data analysis where, we outsource what our labs are doing, but we're sifting through that data, seeing where our levels are high, and then kind of throwing that and being able to explain it to people at the power plant. And being able to offer that service is really valuable because we're tracking our compliance when we're out of compliance, and we can start to see those numbers go down as we get more involved.
Awesome. Well, just a couple questions left. Once again, thank you for your time, and for the students who are watching live, feel free to chime in with questions in the chat. This was a hot topic before COVID and all of us started working remotely. But I'm curious, a lot of students always ask about work-life balance, and, they want to know how that works. Is there flexibility? And so, this is also a question of ignorance for me. I'm learning a lot from y'all, and obviously you have to think about it a little bit outside the lens of our pandemic when so many of us are having to work from home or work different than what they're used to. But I'm curious, have you found that these sort of your positions have offered that for you, or is that something you've had to adjust?
Honestly, that's more of what I lead with when someone asks me, what do I do? Because they don't know what I do. It's harder to explain, but I'm like, hey, I get to work from home. I like all of that. It's great. But like for me and my specific role, it's not subject to the pandemic at all. I work from home. It's cheaper for the company, I think, in the end, as long as you're functioning the same way you would in an office. You have a dedicated space and all of that. I have absolute flexibility in my schedule as long as I'm not in a meeting, and as long as I'm getting my work done. It doesn't matter if I do it at 10 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock in the morning. And so that's been really great. And I've worked for specific companies that have been more strict on that and less. Most of the positions that I've held in, like I said, in project management and site management, they've had at least like 1 or 2 days a week of work from home, and then some of it in the office, stuff like that. But the flexibility has been pretty consistent as far as like if you need to leave, go, and then just get your work done. And you cannot trade that. I don't know that I could ever go back to punching a clock at this point. I don't know that I could. It doesn't mean that the work is just not, that's not a requirement of the work. So that's kind of my favorite part about it too.
So at PRA, we have a couple different shift options, and that can help with work-life balance. And it's mainly because we get so many samples a day and we have limited machines, and so we have to stagger ourselves so that we are almost processing samples 24/7. So we have people who come in and work on the weekends. But it's really transparent, like what shift you're getting, and if you're a morning person, we have morning shifts, we have night shifts. So we even have, we've had students start working in their last, their senior year of college, and they'll work a night shift with us with some flexibility to work around their schedule, and be, finishing college at the same time that they're getting, a full year of industry experience. I think with industry, I mean, if samples come in, they have to get processed. So it goes back to being flexible. But, my boss is so good about asking people about burnout and, if we are having like crazy sample loads, he asks for volunteers. It's never, oh, you have to stay late. You don't have an option. He'll go around and be like, hey, we've got an hour of overtime today. Anyone want it? And we get paid overtime. So it's sometimes nice to be like, yeah, you know what? I'll take that.
Yeah, mine's kind of a blend between those two. So at KCS, we just do, all but like two of us, I think. There are a couple of guys over on the LCMS side that do night shift, but for the most part, at least my department is entirely the same shift. But as we are, a contract research organization, if samples come in or if timelines change or, a pandemic strikes and our materials have to get put on hold, and then, the clients still want to make their, FDA deadlines, that can mean, sometimes unexpected overtime happens. But yeah, I think finding a company and like being able to communicate with your boss and have a boss that, communicates well with you is definitely something to look for, because I think at least that may be a preconceived notion that I kind of had before really getting into college with science, is that, especially if you're dealing with live things, you kind of have to do it on your sciences schedule, not necessarily, and science doesn't always know that it's 5 o'clock on a Friday and you want to go home and, watch The Bachelor or something. So you have to, I don't even know if that's 9:30. But you have to be willing to be flexible in that regard, but identifying what's important to you and finding a position that lines up with that, I think will really help in the long run.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm kind of in a weird intermediate position where I work at a hospital, but it's also more like an academic institute as well. So I have the flexibility of kind of making my own hours. I typically work during the day, but I have coworkers and teammates that kind of come in later and then work later in the evening. Especially right now, we're supposed to stagger with the pandemic. But I think it's also kind of, Gentry, you touched on this, important that when you are looking at positions and you're getting offers, is to discuss kind of what the company's culture is and if that fits in with your work-life balance that you would like, and whether your boss will work with you on creating that balance. I have a great position now where I can take time off as needed, but also the science does come up and I have had to go on the weekends to the lab to take care of stuff for a short period of time. But with my background, I was used to that. So it's just, it's kind of what you want to make it. And if your company or manager or boss is willing to work with you.
So I work pretty regular hours, between 8 and 4 or 5, somewhere in there. But I will also reiterate that having a supervisor that you respect and can have honest conversations about work-life balance is, I think, the most important, because they're the one who's going to directly impact your hours, approve your time, kind of look through that and understand when you're working and when you're not. And my supervisor is amazing. And now that we've transitioned to work from home, and Evergy actually long-term is probably going to have a large number of our office staff consider working from home. And so that's great. And that allows us more flexibility. But they're pretty flexible. If I need to leave for an hour or two for something, I can leave whenever I need to. And I would also say that because a lot of the projects I'm working on are my projects, I can schedule them whenever I want. So if I want to be at home for a day because I know I have to get some, important things done, I can do that. But if I, want to go to Wichita and knock out some stuff that we have in the field, I can spend all day doing that. And if I want to work a 12 or 14-hour day, that's my choice. So I like that I kind of have control over my own schedule. It's not someone else telling me you need to do these things at this time.
Sure, that's awesome. Well, final question to wrap up. A lot of students, at least that we're talking to here, have expressed some apprehension about what the job landscape is going to look like in the future with the pandemic, and so much uncertainty out in the world. Is there any last thought or encouragement you'd want to pass along to students who are watching this, just especially for those who are about to enter the job market?
I think research right now is more important than it ever has been, especially I know some people that are currently working on vaccine studies. That stuff's super important. I think the industry as a whole is only growing. I think it's encouraging, but I think with the growth, I think different positions will emerge and become available, and they might be something that's even better, even more targeted towards the college graduate that's coming.
Yeah, I think definitely flexibility is a big thing, because especially I would have never thought, I would have figured that our business people were business majors. But actually a lot of our people that get our contracts and go and network with other companies that we do business with, oftentimes a lot of them do have science backgrounds. So, if you're the kind of person that's I don't know if I could see myself spending, all the time in the bench, don't restrict yourself thinking that, that you're going to be at the bench, or you could try it at the bench for a while and get experience and then just keep going in different places. So I think there's always going to be a need for science, especially I think the pandemic's shown us that we're not going anywhere anytime fast, or maybe we're going many places fast. But just to be flexible and just to keep kind of your ears open and make connections with people, because you never know where the next opportunity will pop up.
Yeah, definitely go out there and network with people. I think that's really important to do. And like Gentry said, make those connections in your field, in connected fields, because maybe that person knows someone and can get your foot in the door. It can be a little scary during a time like this. I remember graduating college in 2008 and being a little worried about what I was going to do for the future. So what I did was go to graduate school to obtain my PhD. But if that's not something that interests people, I really think just, it can be frustrating not being able to find something, but just don't give up and kind of just keep trying, keep looking, keep talking to people, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think on that note too, with the job hunting process, I know I was at it for a few months before I was able to find a position that I was ready to take in Kansas City. So also don't, start to take it personally. I'm sure that you're a great candidate, but unfortunately sometimes, you can do all the best, but there might be someone that's a better fit. So it doesn't mean that you're, a terrible candidate or, you're never going to get a job. You will. And it just takes time and just keeping at it.
For the job hunt, I've found it's almost I think every company I've ever worked at, they provide incentives to their current employees to refer people. And so don't be afraid to look people up on LinkedIn and be hey, this person is in the company that I'm looking for, in the department that I'm looking at applying. And before you apply, send them your resume and be hey, I don't know you. Would you mind looking over my resume? And if you think you would be comfortable referring me, that would be great. I'd appreciate it. People will do it.
Yeah.
I would say apply to as many things as you're remotely interested in, because oftentimes times when you're reading a job posting, you have no idea what that job really entails, right? Like it's a few sentences, maybe a few paragraphs. And so when you get in the interview, because a lot of times the people you work with is super important. So if you get in there and the people sitting across from you are not people you're interested in working with, if they offer you the job, you can always say no. I tell people that all the time because I think especially students are like going to say yes to the first job they get offered, and that's fine, you can, but also you always have the option to say no. So get in there. The interview practice is always good practice regardless of how you're getting it. So go to lots of interviews, just apply to lots of things and get your resume out there. I also would say just think outside the box. I would say anyone with a biology degree is qualified to do what I do. And so most biology majors wouldn't think, oh, I want to do environmental science. But we have several people on our team who they're undergrads in biology. So, think outside the box, and maybe the things that you're searching on, Indeed or other job sites aren't necessarily all of your options.
Yeah, and to go along with Laura is kind of, you said it's okay to say no. Know your worth. I think that's really important and if you don't feel like a company is going to pay you what you are worth, then absolutely say no. You can do it in a nice way, but absolutely say no. You don't have to say yes to every position. It might be kind of scary, especially if you don't have something lined up, but it's really important to know your worth.
Yeah.
They're also, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
They're also almost never going to rescind your offer because you request a negotiation. If you are offered a salary and you're not, even if you're really comfortable with it, just say, hey, like, is there any flexibility here? And like, can I would really think that my skills and my, experience is worth this much. Can you take it back to the hiring manager and see? It doesn't hurt to ask, and they're not going to say, now we don't want you.
And those can be really hard conversations to do if you've never done them before. And I listen to a bunch of different career podcasts that kind of help walk you through those. So yeah, and learning to be able to sell yourself in an interview, and that's also with knowing your worth. Because when you know what you're worth and you know what your strengths are, you're going to be able to better sell those to your interview or interviewers.
I would say you should always negotiate your salary. I think especially women, everyone's nodding. I'm like, women will not negotiate your salary. They're just going to take what they're given, especially right out of college. And I think your first job, you should absolutely try to negotiate your salary because you're your only advocate, and the worst thing they can say is no. And that was the answer anyway without trying. And so also when you jump jobs, that's your biggest chance often for a raise. And so don't be afraid to work a job for 9 months and then go after something else if you're not loving it. I think a lot of times people feel like they have to put in a year or two at their first job so it doesn't look bad on their resume. But if you're going to be able to explain that and feel like your skills are better matched for something else, or you feel like the company you're at isn't willing to give you a raise, no one at all is going to fault you for that. And so I definitely think that that's something you should consider, is just at least trying to negotiate your first salary. Another thing I would mention is when I was graduating, I was applying for jobs really early, and it almost felt like too early to be applying for stuff because I hadn't received, my diploma yet or hadn't technically graduated. But I actually accepted an offer before I finished, and they let me actually work part-time until I graduated. And so don't be afraid to apply early. Most places are willing to be pretty flexible with that.
Yeah, I would second what Laura said. My first job out of college, I also applied early, worked part-time until I graduated, and then I could move full-time. And then here at PRA, like I mentioned earlier, we do that all the time with lab analysts, as well as some of our other more desk, mainly desk jobs.
Awesome. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you all so much for your time. For the students who are watching, feel free to follow up with the University Career Center if you have any more questions. Thank you, panelists. You've been fantastic. Keese, if you'll take us off live, that would be great. Thank you so much, everyone. That was wonderful.